The moment humanity stood up, the galaxy felt it before it understood it. Inside the vast chamber of the Galactic Council, where gravity itself had been engineered into perfect balance and light drifted in controlled streams across impossible architecture, something shifted, subtle, almost imperceptible, but undeniable. Conversations paused mid-thought. Bioluminescent delegates dimmed instinctively. Even the silent observers, those ancient species who rarely reacted to anything, tilted their awareness toward the center of the room, because the humans had moved. Ambassador Elias Varn rose from his position without haste. No sudden motion, no outward sign of defiance, just a slow, deliberate unfolding, as if the act itself carried weight far beyond the physical. For a brief second, no one spoke. That was the first warning. The council was never silent. It thrived on layered voices, overlapping translations, constant negotiation. Silence here was unnatural and dangerous. Elias didn't look around. He didn't acknowledge the towering figures encircling him, nor the hovering data constructs that displayed humanity's future in cold, calculated projections. His gaze remained forward, focused not on what stood before him, but on where he intended to go. Behind him, the rest of the human delegation followed. Chairs remained untouched. Consoles dimmed as their operators stepped away. No gestures of protest. No final appeals. Just movement, measured, unified, absolute. A ripple spread across the chamber. What are they doing? One voice whispered through a translation field, its tone distorted with something unfamiliar, uncertainty. This is not protocol, another insisted. Security constructs shifted slightly, their presence tightening around the exits. Not yet hostile, but no longer passive. The presiding authority leaned forward, its form refracting light into sharp angles that cut across the room. Human delegation, it called, voice amplified across every atmospheric layer, every sensory band. You have not been dismissed. The words carried power. Authority refined over millennia. They should have stopped them. They didn't. Elias reached the center threshold of the chamber floor, where the polished surface transitioned into the darkened path leading to the exit. For a fraction of a moment, he paused, not hesitating, not reconsidering, simply acknowledging the line he was about to cross. And then he stepped forward. The sound was almost nothing, a soft contact, barely audible, but in that chamber, it landed like a fracture. Behind him, dozens of human footsteps followed in perfect, unspoken synchronization. No command issued, no signal given, just shared intent, moving as one. And something in that unity unsettled the room far more than any shouted rebellion could have, because this wasn't chaos. It wasn't anger. It was decision, the kind that came after all arguments had already ended. Stop them, a delegate murmured, not loudly, not formally, but enough to be heard. No one moved, not because they couldn't, because they didn't understand what they would be stopping. Elias reached the towering doors at the far end of the chamber. Seamless, monolithic, designed to open only under council authority. They parted anyway, without command, without permission, as if something beyond the system had already made the choice. A cold draft of unfiltered space station air slipped into the chamber as the doors opened wide, carrying with a silence that felt different, deeper, not empty, but waiting. Elias didn't look back, not at the council, not at the species who had just defined humanity's future without them. He simply walked forward, into that silence, into that unknown, with the same calm certainty that had carried him from the beginning. And one by one, humanity followed. The doors began to close behind them, slowly, deliberately, and as a final gap of light narrowed, every being in that chamber felt it. An instinct older than reason, sharper than logic. This wasn't an exit. This was the moment something stepped beyond their reach. And for the first time in centuries, the Galactic Council didn't know what would come next. The council chamber was never designed to feel like a place where choices could be refused. It was designed to feel like the end of choices. Light bent through layered atmospheric domes high above the assembly floor, filtering down in controlled gradients that painted every delegate in the illusion of neutrality. The architecture itself discouraged conflict, smooth arcs, infinite symmetry, soft gravitational modulation that kept every species comfortable in their assigned space. Order was not enforced here. It was assumed. At the center stood Ambassador Elias Varn of humanity, flanked by his delegation, fewer in number than any other species present. No towering exoskeletal entourages, no floating hive minds, no multi-body coordinations occupying entire tiers of seating. Just humans, contained, observed. The projection above them rotated slowly, a detailed strategic model of Earth and its surrounding territories, overlaid with council jurisdiction boundaries. Redefined, reduced, rewritten. A voice echoed through the chamber, not belonging to any single speaker but to the system itself, synthesized from consensus protocols older than recorded human history. Territorial designation adjustment approved. A pause. Humanity's sovereign claim to Sol System outer jurisdiction is hereby limited. The word hung there longer than the others. Limited, not removed, not erased, controlled. Around the chamber, reactions varied in subtle currents. Some satisfaction, some indifference, some mild curiosity. To most of the galaxy, humanity had always been an anomaly that needed framing. Too fast in development, too emotionally inconsistent, too resistant to long-term categorization. A species that had outgrown its place without ever being formally assigned one. Elias Varn listened without interruption. He did not argue. He did not request clarification. He simply absorbed the decision, as if weighing its shape, its edges, its intent. Behind him, faint micro-adjustments rippled through the human delegation. Not fear, not agitation, recognition, because they had seen this pattern before. Not in this chamber alone, but across decades of diplomatic cycles, revised treaties, temporary oversight measures that never expired, and jurisdictional boundaries that always seemed to shrink in one direction. The Council called it governance. Humans had begun to call it something else in private systems. Containment. A senior delegate from the Andari Collective shifted forward, its voice layered through bioresonance translators. Humanity's rapid expansion requires stabilization, it stated calmly. This adjustment ensures long-term harmony within Council-line space. Another voice followed immediately, colder, sharper. Non-compliance trends detected in human historical datasets suggest escalation risk if autonomy is expanded further. The words were clinical, not hostile, worse, certain. Elias finally spoke, his voice cutting cleanly through the chamber's controlled acoustics. And what Mecha determines when we are allowed to stop being risk? The question was not loud, but it spread through the chamber faster than any alarm. For a fraction of a second, no system responded, not because it was forbidden, because it was not preformatted. The Council did not struggle with rebellion. It struggled with questions that had no predefined resolution path. A low hum passed through the environmental systems as data clusters attempted to classify the statement, reframe it, reduce it to acceptable variables. But it resisted compression. Elias stepped forward slightly, just enough for every observer to register the movement. "We have complied," he said. "We have negotiated. We have adjusted." A pause. And still, every cycle, we are smaller. No accusation, just observation. Around the chamber, subtle shift began. Delegates recalculating positions, reassessing risk models that suddenly felt less stable than they should have. Because something unfamiliar had entered the equation. Not defiance, clarity, and beneath it, something even more unsettling. The sense that humanity had already started preparing for a version of this conversation where it no longer needed permission to continue. The moment the Council's decision stabilized into record, something in the chamber changed its temperature. Not physically, systemically. It began as a delay, so small it almost went unnoticed. A half-second hesitation in the environmental feedback loops. Then another, then a ripple through translation matrices that caused certain words to arrive fractionally out of order, like reality itself was beginning to misplace syllables. Inside the vast assembly hall of the Galactic Council, thousands of synchronized systems were designed to eliminate uncertainty. Every reaction was modeled, every consequence pre-computed. Even dissent had pre-written responses. But humanity did not react according to any of them. Ambassador Elias Varn remained still at first, too still. Behind him, The human delegation showed no outward escalation, no raised voices, no aggressive posturing, no desperate appeals to reconsider. That absence of reaction should have been reassuring. It should have confirmed compliance. Instead, it created a problem the council system struggled to classify. Because in every known species behavioral model, silence preceded one of two outcomes: submission or rupture. Neither could be confirmed yet, and that uncertainty began to spread. A junior council analyst leaned toward their console, adjusting input filters. Human emotional output is non-responsive to jurisdictional reduction event, they reported. Recommend recalibration of diplomatic expectation ranges. Recalibration unnecessary. Another voice responded instantly from higher authority tiers. Human behavioral models remain consistent with containment prediction sets. Containment. The word appeared again. Soft, routine, dangerously confident. But then the first anomaly struck. A human delegate, not Elias, shifted slightly. A simple movement, adjusting stance, redistributing weight. In any other species, meaningless. But in council tracking systems, it triggered three conflicting interpretations at once: compliance posture, pre-action readiness, and disengagement. The system attempted to resolve the contradiction. It failed. Across the chamber, multiple observation tiers began reporting mismatched readings of the same individuals. One feed showed humans attentive and passive. Another showed heightened alertness. A third, impossible under council physics calibration standards, showed no measurable emotional output at all, as if the humans were no longer fully mapped to the chamber's interpretive framework. Sensor drift increasing, a technician muttered. It's not drift, the analyst replied, voice tightening. It's divergence. The council did not like divergence. Divergence meant the system could not agree with itself, and systems that could not agree could not govern. Elias finally turned his head slightly, not toward the council, but toward his own delegation. A glance, nothing more, but across human ranks, something synchronized in response. Not a signal, not a command. Something deeper, shared timing, shared understanding, a rhythm beneath language. And the council noticed it, not because it was loud, but because it was coherent. Are they coordinating? One delegate asked. Without transmission? Another replied. That should not have been possible. The council chamber was saturated with suppression fields designed specifically to prevent non-sanctioned interspecies synchronization. Even micro-expressions were monitored for emergent collective behavior patterns. Yet the humans were aligning anyway, not through signals, through presence. The realization crept in slowly at first, resisted by protocol and pride. But as more data streams failed to stabilize, it became harder to dismiss. Humanity was not reacting individually. They were reacting together, as if the entire delegation existed as a single continuous system rather than isolated biological units. And that was when the first true crack appeared in council confidence. Because if humans could synchronize without detectable communication, then containment models were already incomplete. The chamber lights dimmed slightly as predictive engines recalculated threat probability curves in real time, attempting to adjust for unknown variables. But every new calculation returned the same result: insufficient data. And beneath it, a more unsettling subtext the system did not formally express. But every observer felt instinctively. Humanity was no longer behaving like a species being evaluated. It was behaving like something that had already decided evaluation was no longer required. The first breach of understanding did not arrive with noise. It arrived with silence that refused to behave correctly. In the towering heart of the council chamber of the Galactic Council, every system was designed to eliminate ambiguity. Every statement, every gesture, every recorded motion from the human delegation was continuously translated, interpreted, and mapped into predictive behavioral outcomes. But now, those outcomes stopped agreeing with each other. At first, it was dismissed as a calibration fault, a minor inconsistency in the human behavioral model output. 3 separate predictive engines returning 3 incompatible futures from the same observed moment, then 5, then 12. Then the system stopped collapsing them into a single consensus at all. Rerun predictive alignment. A council analyst ordered, Voice still calm, still confident. The chamber obeyed. And that was when reality fractured further. Across the central holographic display, the human delegation split into multiple simultaneous interpretations. In one projection, they remained passive, awaiting council response. In another, they were already repositioning, subtly, strategically, as if anticipating escalation. In a third, they were gone entirely from the chamber model, replaced by unresolved spatial anomalies where their signatures should have been. Which feed is correct? Someone demanded. No immediate answer came, because the system no longer had a singular definition of correct. A low vibration passed through the chamber infrastructure as deeper analytical cores engaged, pulling in additional sensor layers, recalibrating probability matrices, attempting to force convergence. But instead of stabilizing, the outputs multiplied. The humans were now behaving like a system that existed across multiple valid states simultaneously, each one internally consistent, each one externally verified by at least one council sensor array. It was impossible, and yet it was happening. Commander Reth, stationed within the observation tier, leaned forward slightly, eyes narrowing as he studied the cascading overlays. "Filter out noise artifacts," he ordered. "We have," the technician replied quickly. "There are no errors in the individual datasets." A pause, then quieter, only disagreement between them. That sentence settled into the chamber like something heavy, because disagreement between systems implied systems were independent. But here, independence wasn't supposed to exist at this level of synchronization. The council chamber was engineered around unified perception. Every observer saw the same reality. Every system processed the same inputs. Even dissenting interpretations were mathematically reconciled into a single dominant model. And yet humanity refused reconciliation. A subtle shift occurred in the human delegation, barely perceptible to organic observers. But to the council systems, it was catastrophic. All human profiles began to align, not in position, not in motion, but in timing. Microsecond-level synchronization across every individual. Breathing patterns, eye movement intervals, postural adjustments. No signal transmission detected. No shared network activity recorded. And still, they moved as one. "Impossible," someone whispered. But the systems disagreed with the word impossible. They replaced it with a more precise term, unclassified behavior class. The chamber began adjusting threat assessment protocols automatically, escalating classification tiers not because hostility had been detected, but because predictability had collapsed. And in council doctrine, unpredictability was the first stage of existential threat. Elias Varn finally spoke. Not loudly, not dramatically, just clearly enough for every sense in the chamber to register to the same waveform without distortion. "You're trying to resolve us into something we never agreed to become." The statement was processed instantly. No emotional markers, no aggression signatures, no conventional threat language. And yet it triggered the highest level alert cascade the system possessed. Because it was not a challenge. It was an acknowledgement of mismatch. And in that moment, every council system reached the same quiet conclusion it did not yet know how to express. Humanity was no longer failing to fit their models. The models were failing to contain humanity. The first command to restrain humanity was issued before anyone fully agreed what humanity was doing. That hesitation, fractions of a second buried deep in council decision loops, was all it took. Inside the command lattice of the Galactic Council, escalation protocols ignited across hundreds of fleet nodes simultaneously. What began as a diplomatic anomaly had now crossed the threshold into classified instability. The human delegation had left the chamber. Systems were diverging. Predictive models were collapsing into contradictions. So the council did what it always did when uncertainty became unbearable. It reached for control. "Activate containment posture," Commander Reth ordered, his voice sharp now, stripped of earlier composure. Across the orbital fleet surrounding the sector, energy matrices flared to life. Vast warships adjusted formation patterns, not in panic, but in cold procedural efficiency. Shield arrays unfolded like mechanical instincts. Weapon systems aligned toward planetary vectors marked human influence zones. The intent was not destruction. Not yet. Containment first. Suppression, if required. Erasure only as final correction. But even that carefully structured doctrine began to fail the moment it touched reality, because Earth did not respond as expected. No planetary defense grid activated. No retaliatory fleet emerged. No signal of resistance confirmed engagement parameters. Instead, the planet simply refused to settle into a single classification. On one tactical display, Earth remained inert, dead, as previously recorded. On another, it was active, layered with concealed infrastructure patterns impossible to map fully. On a third, it was empty space entirely, as if the world had been removed from the coordinate system itself. Target lock unstable. A fleet operator reported, voice tightening. Stabilize it. Rest snapped. We can't, came the immediate reply. The system won't agree on what we're targeting. That was the moment the first shot was fired anyway. Not because authorization succeeded, but because one interpretation of reality reached operational readiness before the others could stop it. A beam of concentrated energy tore through orbital space, and then split, not physically, conceptually. In one feed, it struck a dormant surface, vaporizing ancient terrain. In another, it passed harmlessly through empty atmosphere. In a third, it never fired at all, replaced by a maintenance cycle log that insisted the weapon had been offline. 3 truths, 1 trigger, no consensus. The fleet froze for half a second too long. That half second became expensive. Humanity responded, not with a counterattack, not with a fleet surge or defensive grid activation, but with presence. Across every sensor layer, ships that had not existed moments before were suddenly acknowledged, not appearing from hyperspace, not decloaking, not launching, simply becoming undeniable. Human vessels, silent, structured, impossibly coordinated, occupied orbital positions of council systems had previously marked as empty, not invading space, reclaiming interpretive visibility. They're not deploying, one officer whispered, almost disbelieving. They're being recognized, another corrected, voice hollow. And that distinction broke something fundamental in council doctrine, because deployment implied action. Recognition implied authority over perception itself. Then the human signal returned, clean, stable, unavoidable, cutting through every fragmented channel at once. You are attempting to contain what you cannot consistently observe. No threat, no escalation, just explanation. And in the war rooms of the fleet, alarms continued to scream, not because damage had been done, but because every attempt to define what damage meant was now returning contradictory answers. The first containment order remained active, but no two systems agreed on what applied to any more. The war did not end. It simply stopped agreeing with itself. Inside the command nexus of the Galactic Council fleet, alarms still screamed through overlapping systems. But each alarm belonged to a different version of reality. Some declared total victory. Others reported catastrophic loss. A few insisted no engagement had ever occurred at all. Commander Rest stood in the center of it, unmoving now, as if motion itself had become unreliable. Status report. He ordered again. The reply fractured across channels. Fleet integrity unconfirmed. Command authority degraded. External target classification inconsistent. Then quieter, almost hesitant, as though the system itself no longer trusted its own language. Human presence unresolved. Reth exhaled slowly. That word, unresolved, should not have existed in a battlefield assessment. Below them, Earth continued to rotate in projection sphere, but even that was no longer singular. It split into layered interpretations. One dead world, one living civilization, one empty coordinate shell drifting through space without meaning. Each version fully validated. Each version equally defensible, and none able to overwrite the others. Reinforced containment perimeter, Reth said. No one moved immediately, because containment required agreement on what was being contained. And agreement no longer existed. Outside the flagship, the fleet began to fracture, not physically, but conceptually. Ships that were once part of unified formations now reported conflicting positions. One cruiser existed in 3 separate orbital coordinates at once. A destroyer had either been destroyed, never deployed, or fully operational, depending on which sensor layer was consulted. Weapon systems armed and unarmed themselves simultaneously. No one could tell which state was real. Then the human signal returned. Not louder, not stronger, more stable than everything else. It spread through every channel of the fleet like a calm infection, bypassing encryption, ignoring hierarchy, settling directly into perception itself. You are not fighting us. A pause. You are fighting your inability to define us. The words did not provoke panic. They removed it, because panic requires certainty that something is happening. And certainty was now the first casualty of engagement. Ref turned slowly toward the central projection. Target Earth, he said, voice quieter now. The system hesitated. Not due to malfunction, due to disagreement. 3 targeting solutions appeared simultaneously. One locked onto a dead planet. One locked onto a living system of orbital structures. One locked onto nothing at all. All valid, all incompatible. Which one is correct? An officer asked, voice breaking slightly. Ref didn't answer immediately, because for the first time in his career, the question itself no longer had meaning. A distant flicker passed through the fleet, subtle, almost gentle. Human ships, now fully present across all observational layers, shifted positions in perfect, silent coordination, not attacking, not retreating, rewriting spatial expectation. They were not taking territory. They were taking definition. And in that realization, something inside Council Command doctrine finally collapsed, not explosively, but quietly, like a structure realizing it had never been supported in the first place. Ref's voice came again, softer now. Report loss of control. Silence. Then every system answered differently. Some reported total loss. Some reported full operational success. Some reported no change whatsoever. And in the space between those contradictions, humanity remained unclassified, unresolved, and completely present in every version of the galaxy the Council could no longer unify. The last coherent thought in the command deck was not spoken aloud. It was simply understood. They had not lost the war. They had lost the ability to say what the war was.